Welcome to LionHeart Talks, a series of podcasts from LionHeart.
Hello and welcome to the LionHeart Talks podcast. This 6-part series is all about well-being, and on this episode we'll be focusing on grief and bereavement. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Jo Grant. I'm Training and Wellbeing Projects Manager at LionHeart, and I'll be your host for today. And on this episode, I'm joined by my colleague, Mark Hodson, one of LionHeart's counsellors. Mark, would you like to give us a little introduction to yourself?
Hi Jo, and thank you for asking me to come along. As Jo said, my name's Mark. I'm one of the counsellors at LionHeart. I've been with LionHeart now just over 5 years, and kind of supporting members and their families.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
So, grief and bereavement. Bereavement is something that happens to us all at some point in our life, and grief is a natural response to loss. It doesn't just occur when we lose a family member or a friend. It can also occur following a breakdown of a relationship, the death of a pet or a public figure, or even the loss of a job. There are many different models used to help people understand the process of grief, and we'll run through one specific model today. But before we do that, Mark, let's hand back to you. Is grief and bereavement something that you deal with on a regular basis as a counsellor?
Absolutely. It's always, as you say, it happens to everyone, but kind of particularly with COVID and kind of all of the situations that have arisen from there. Yeah, it certainly is something that I'm dealing with. I think I have 4, maybe 5 clients currently, and that's normal for kind of a caseload. Yeah. And
before we start, is there anything in particular that you like to draw attention to, or points that are important for people to remember when we think about grief?
I think probably the most important thing I would say is trying to normalise those kind of conversations, because it is it is almost like a taboo subject, isn't it? It's something that we don't talk about, something that we don't like to think about. But as you rightly said, it happens to us all, and we don't like to think about our own mortality. But actually, it's such an important conversation to have, and in talking about how you feel about a loss is equally really, really important. So yeah, kind of trying to normalise those conversations and kind of encourage people to talk about how they feel is a big part of the work that we as counsellors do, definitely.
And counselling, I suppose, gives people that opportunity to talk about those things that they perhaps find hard to talk about with a family member or a friend.
Absolutely, and it is a very different space than, as you say, kind of a relationship with a family member or a friend, because people don't necessarily they don't at all have to filter what they're talking about, what they're thinking about, or how they're putting things out. They can just say it like it is. It's a confidential space, it's a safe space, it's also a non-judgmental space. So, whatever they say isn't going to be met with, whatever else is going on for the other person. So, yeah.
That opportunity to say what you're really feeling, not be judged.
Absolutely, which is a really, really rare and powerful thing, definitely.
Yeah. And I think it's a great opportunity, isn't it, as well, for people, because, as you said, we shy away from talking to people about grief, about feelings, about what's going on in too much detail. Perhaps if we've got a friend or a family member that's been bereaved, we don't want to risk upsetting them by perhaps drawing attention or talking about that subject, when actually the best thing you could do is have that conversation or let that person know that you're there in that way.
Yeah, a lot of clients tell me actually the worst thing that people do is say nothing, because there are no right or wrong answers, and that's really important to know about. Whatever you say, at least you're communicating, which is really, really important. And like I say, so many people have told me that actually, after a loss, that people just shut down because for the fear of saying the wrong thing, they just say nothing, and that's really not helpful.
And I guess that can make things harder in a lot of senses, because it leaves that person feeling alone.
Absolutely.
When the last thing they want at that time is to feel alone.
Yeah. It's about establishing connections, isn't it? And obviously we are all social creatures, and we all need people around us, particularly at really emotive times like a bereavement. So yeah, it is really, really important that people are kind of keeping those communication channels open and just talking, and not overthinking what they're saying. I think is what I'd say. Yeah.
And also recognising perhaps that their experience, even if it's for a similar relationship, just because that's how they felt in that situation, or how they think that person might be feeling, it might not be the same, or it won't be the same.
Absolutely.
That experience is different for everyone.
Yeah.
And unique.
Yeah. And that is very, very true. And worked with kind of quite complex cases where we've worked with different family members for one bereavement, and yes, it's a very similar experience, but it is, there are obviously so many variables as that person's relationship with the person that they've lost, all and so many other things that make their experience as unique as they are, and that again is really, really important. It is about every experience is unique.
Okay. We'll look at that a little bit later on, I think. I think I'd like to go back to, we chatted a little bit before this podcast, before we came in to do this recording, and something that you mentioned to me was that there are many different models that can be used to describe that grieving process.
Yeah.
You talked me through the Whirlpool of grief theory or model.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Richard Wilson was the person that founded this.
That's the one.
And I found that really useful. So for those that aren't aware of that theory, uses a really good visual representation of that process of bereavement and grief and the way that we travel through life, I guess. There will be some a link to this available to people after the podcast. You can find that in the notes, but just to give people a quick run through, because we perhaps refer back to this as we go through today's podcast. It talks about our journey through life and our journey being down a river, maybe as if we're in a boat. Maybe everybody's river is different, everybody's journey is different, but we're travelling along our river of life. When we hit a waterfall, and that's the point at which that bereavement happens, and we fall over that waterfall and plunge into the whirlpool of grief below. And then it looks at the different ways that we may process that grief, deal with that grief, what we might go through after that, whether that's being, for the representation of this, washed up on the rocks, onto the banks at the side of the river, just be fighting our way in the whirlpool below that waterfall and being battered again and again before eventually being able to move back on and carry on with our journey.
Yeah, I use it quite a lot with clients. As you say, loss and bereavement is such a complex process, if you like. There are so many different emotions, so many different feelings, and it can feel like a whirlpool. It is, it is overwhelming, and it can be, for different people, that kind of feeling of overwhelm can last, various different times, and I think, the whirlpool model is a really good one, because it shows the kind of the water kind of moving between all of those stages, and it means that actually, you can, one day you may feel like you're moving forward, but then the next day, for whatever reason, you may feel like actually you're back in another place. And again, it's kind of saying, well, there are no rules really as to how you should be feeling or when you should be feeling that way,
and it will be different. For everyone.
Absolutely.
You'll be pulled round and round.
Yeah.
But it's all part of that process.
Absolutely, yeah, really is.
So the start of that model talks about us travelling down our river of life. So now will perhaps be a good time to look at perhaps some of those factors that happen earlier in our life that may affect our grieving process, dependent on who it is that we're who we've lost.
Yeah.
I think, as we've said already a couple of times, there are no rights or wrongs. That grieving process will be different. Everybody's relationships are different, regardless of whether it's a parent, a sibling, a friend. There are so many factors prior to that person passing away that will affect our relationship with them and perhaps how we feel in that situation.
Absolutely.
So do you want to perhaps describe some of those factors and how they may affect someone's grief?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one you've touched on is actually the person's relationship with that person. And, obviously, we all, when you say the word parent, people sometimes do think of, a stable, happy relationship. But that's not always the case for everyone. And obviously those situations and those difficulties can bring a whole host of other difficulties. There may be feelings of guilt around maybe not being able to repair the relationship, or there may be kind of feeling, extra feelings of loss because of the other times that they weren't able to spend with that person. And equally as well, the loss of somebody that you're really close to.
Yep.
Again, comes with so many different variables, and it is, again, just a really, really complex thing to navigate. And again, it kind of, as you say, it just reinforces the unique nature of everybody's journey.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think some of those other factors that we perhaps that have an impact, things like the way that person may have died. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I've worked with kind of clients where kind of the loss has been due to illness. Yeah. Different kinds of illnesses. Cancer obviously is very prevalent. Motor neurone disease, other kind of ailments, and you almost go through a process with that person. Obviously, they become unwell, and that process for some people almost kind of starts their grieving process, if that makes sense, and kind of they're almost grieving for the person before they've actually died, and that is, and again, equally on the other side of that, I've also worked with people where the loss has been incredibly sudden. I've worked with a couple of people where kind of one night their partner went to bed as normal and they woke up and their partner was no longer alive. So really, 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 really sudden loss. And that again brings up a whole load of questions and kind of just really, really complex, really, really difficult emotions. And it is again kind of working out what those circumstances are, what the impact of those on the people that are left behind are, and then obviously trying to support that person the best way possible.
Really, so many variables there, isn't there?
Yeah.
So many different versions of ill health, so
Absolutely.
many different ways that people can pass away.
Absolutely. And
expected, unexpected.
Yeah. And it is, and again, it is that whole kind of, that connecting with it can be really, really difficult because it connects us to our own mortality, which isn't something people like to necessarily think about, which is understandable. But yeah, it is such a wide set of variables, and everybody will go, coming back to that model, everybody will kind of go over that waterfall in their own unique way. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Some will see it coming to some degree.
To some degree, yeah. And
as much as you may not want to think it's going to happen, in some situations, I guess, it's coming. Yeah. It is going to happen.
Yeah.
It may, whether it's through ill health, old age, etc.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just thrown into
completely
that unexpected.
Completely.
And I think at that point, or at this point, it's perhaps also we should touch on the situation as well with suicide.
Yeah, well, that's obviously another level of loss, and as well as kind of the actual loss of the person as a whole, there are usually quite a lot of questions left with the people who are left behind, and kind of, it is around trying to find a pathway through.
Yeah.
And that's really, really hard to do when you're kind of being, when you have those questions. I was just thinking about a case there. One of the we did actually work with a client who had lost a family member through suicide, and yeah, I just remember just the huge amount of questions that they had, and it was just trying to hold them emotionally and just trying to be there for them, and because there isn't there isn't a magic fix. Counselling doesn't have, counselling can't make bereavement better. It's a way of connecting with how you're feeling and having that safe, non-judgmental space to actually talk about it, but it can't be changed, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, it is kind of just trying to be with that person and show that person that actually, however they are, that you're not going to run away, you're not going to be scared. You can meet them wherever they are emotionally, and you can hold them, and then you can say, okay, so we're here together. Let's see where we go. Yeah. This time. Yeah.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
There is a way forward.
Absolutely.
That's for us to work through together.
Yeah. And goes back to kind of giving them a connection, but a different kind of connection, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. It's made us think about some of those factors that will impact and make that grief, that situation, different for everyone. Mm-hmm. Some of those things that might have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
I know this may not be something that you're perhaps so comfortable to talk about, but to some level as well, there'll be possibly for some people a cultural or a faith, religious impact in their process for grief.
Absolutely.
What's expected,
mm-hmm.
what's acceptable,
mm-hmm.
how quickly you should move on perhaps from something.
Yeah, faith and religion and culture are obviously all really important, and that's where counselling is. You are kind of starting off almost with a clean slate with each person that you meet, and it is about kind of finding out what their values are, finding out what their beliefs are, and kind of working within those. So it is about having those conversations around what are your religious beliefs? Do they impact on how you feel about loss and bereavement? Because they probably do, and it's about being able to show the person that you're prepared to go to those places and talk about those things, because it is about getting to know that person as a whole person.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you may be their only opportunity to do that.
Absolutely.
For some people.
Yeah.
Some people will have a very good family network or friend
mm-hmm.
network around them,
yep.
and that support, but some people won't.
No, and some people may feel like they do have a very good support network around them, but actually for whatever reason, and again, the reasons could be so many and varied, but they may feel like actually they can't talk about how they're feeling because maybe they're seen as being the strong one, being the one who has to just kind of keep things going, and actually whilst they might have good physical support, actually emotionally they might not have that opportunity.
So we've talked there about the lead up to a death,
mm-hmm.
How our relationship with that person, along with how they've died, might affect us and our grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
But what might those initial feelings be like for somebody at that point of bereavement? What's common for people to feel, to see?
I guess that's a really big question. I guess I would say kind of shock, overwhelm, just kind of just feeling completely overwhelmed is really, really common. There may be as we've talked about, there may be, depending on the circumstances, there may be questions. There may be, well, unfortunately, there is a lot of bureaucracy. There is a lot of red tape when somebody passes away, and a lot of people tend to go into that, which is understandable, and it's really difficult to be logical and emotive at the same time, and kind of that can kind of I think can kind of quite easily feed that sense of overwhelm, that sense of where am I, what am I doing, and how am I going to get through the next day. There are lots of different thoughts around this, but I think it is really, I think personally it is really difficult to hold both of those, like I say, that logical side and the emotional side together, because it's a lot of demands on one person.
And initially, then you said there's a lot of red tape, a lot of processes.
Yeah.
There's funeral planning, maybe making people aware of the person's passed away, etc. So initially, there's perhaps for someone a lot of focus. A lot of process in place. I need to do this. I need to do that. This happens next.
Yeah.
So almost that opportunity to not think or not process what's actually happened, because I've just got to get this done. I've got to sort this out, etc., etc.
Absolutely.
And then perhaps later on, further down the line, that might change.
Yeah, absolutely. And whilst there never are any timescales, I think you are right. I think those first few weeks, first few months, possibly, will be quite focused on what they need to do, what needs to happen, and then there will be a time possibly where those feelings will
catch up with you,
maybe change in intensity. Yeah, again, kind of different for each person, but yeah, catch up with you is a good phrase. I like that.
We've fallen over the waterfall. We're in that whirlpool below. We've talked about how that may affect or about the fact here we've got different emotions, different feelings, being washed up on the bank, the banks of the river, staying in that whirlpool, something I know I mentioned early on. I think I'd like to talk about what grief might look like in the following weeks and the months following that bereavement, reflecting on that whirlpool of grief theory. As we just said, it shows that situations are different, and we might find ourselves in many different situations. I guess that proves that it's not a linear process.
No,
we're not going to move forward in a very set format.
And I think it's also kind of moving forward is obviously important, but also it is about sort of saying that you may find actually you feel like you maybe gone back a couple of steps, but again, it is that that's why I like this model, because it is so flexible. It uses water, which can obviously move in any kind of different direction. But just kind of picking up on your point, the kind of the weeks and the months can be a really, really difficult time, because it is that after the initial shock, and maybe kind of some of that focus that we talked about earlier, maybe that is kind of feeling like there's a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the red tape, and that is when people talk to me about feeling, well, I've been so busy for so long, what do I do? And even before accepting that everybody's circumstances are different, but in some cases, there will obviously be a significant person in that person's life where they may have had, in a case of a partner, they may have had lots of things that they did together, and then suddenly they this person is now on their own, or in a very different situation, and that question of what do I do is a very common one. And also as well, kind of people talk about kind of the changes in seasons as well, kind of almost like it's a very tangible thing that they see, and it feels like they're almost moving forward without that person.
nothing stays the same.
No,
Just because you're feeling like that
absolutely,
now,
absolutely.
it won't last.
Yep.
Things progress, things
Yep.
change.
Yeah. Some people have said that, it feels like actually I just want everything to stop.
And there can be periods where you can be doing quite well, feeling you have perhaps your feelings under control, or you're accepting of where you are and the process and what you're going through, but then something might happen.
Absolutely.
I guess an anniversary, birthday.
Yep. I mean, those
festival, some sort of celebration, and suddenly you realise again that it draws attention to the fact that they're not there.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously those big occasions are obviously important, but also, again, it can be the seemingly small things. I'm remembering one client lost her husband very, very suddenly. And he was an avid reader, and on the chair he used to sit was the book that he was reading, and she just left it there, and kind of she didn't spend a whole lot of time in that room where he used to read, but occasionally when she'd go in, she'd just see the book, and it would be an instant reminder of that person, and it can be that even when you're out and about, going about normal life, you can see something, hear something, smell something, and it can bring back memories, and I think again that is the part of the really, really complex nature of grief, is that the intensity of it can change at any point.
So, as we start to draw towards the end of this podcast, I think it would be really important for us now to touch on counselling.
Yeah.
I think as we've been through today, you've already touched on how counselling can help somebody, the fact that it offers that safe space, that opportunity to say how they're feeling, to talk without judgment. I'm not sure if there's anything else you'd want to add to that in terms of how counselling can help. Feel free to if you want to.
Yeah. It can be really, really difficult to connect with how you're feeling, which is why at LionHeart we kind of recommend a waiting period, if you like, of around 6 weeks.
Okay.
After a bereavement, that gives, generally, again, accepting that all situations are different. Generally, that gives people enough time or some time to at least try and find their own way through that initial thing, and and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about grief being a normal part of life, because it is. Yeah, and like I say, I think it is just about counselling will obviously kind of emphasise self-care and kind of making sure that you're taking care of yourself, and putting time in for yourself to reflect on what's going on, because I think, as we've said before, people can fairly easily get kind of tied into all of the things they need to do, or they may even be they may even create things that they need to do for not wanting to perhaps confront how they're feeling, which is understandable, but it is about giving them that safe space where they can allow those feelings, I think you said, to kind of catch up with them, if that makes sense.
So you mentioned there about self-care, how that can be really important for people. Are there any recommendations there that you would use? Are there any maybe apps that could be useful, or is it more around things that you could do physically? I don't know, getting outside, being active.
I think it is more about kind of the physical side of things, but obviously, if you have things, hobbies and interests that you are interested in, then again, accepting that it will be different, but if you can engage with those, I think that would be useful. But I think it is really important to, as much as possible, is to try not to isolate yourself. I think that's the biggest piece of advice I probably would give. And
accept the importance and the fact that it's not selfish to look after yourself and prioritise yourself.
Absolutely, that is really, really important. And like you say, it is, and especially, like, it's important generally, but especially at times of really, really difficult emotions.
And even if you have perhaps young children, dependents.
Yep.
remembering you've got to look after yourself to be able to continue to look after them.
Yeah, and that's something that I use kind of the first responders analogy quite a lot in sessions. It is about, you need to take care of yourself so that you can take care of other people, and it is about giving yourself the best care you can so that you can then give that to other people. Yeah.
So we've talked about counselling, we've talked about self-care. I'd just like to go back to counselling for one last question, I think, there. You mentioned that an ideal timescale is perhaps after 6 weeks. Is there a timescale for sort of longer? So maybe if somebody is still struggling with some grief from somebody that's passed away perhaps months or even years ago, is there that's never perhaps been properly dealt with, is there still an opportunity to access counselling at that point and it be beneficial to them? Absolutely.
I mean, I have worked with people that have had kind of they didn't have, for whatever reason, they didn't have the opportunity to process their grief when it actually happened, and life happens, and memories are brought up, things are triggered, and yeah, absolutely. I always think having that safe space and having that confidential space is really, really beneficial, and being able to connect with how you're feeling at any point is helpful. And obviously, LionHeart is here for for anyone who kind of wants to access that support. And I would really, really encourage anybody who is listening today who's kind of thinking, maybe I might, please do reach out, email us, call us, however you get in touch, but please do.
Yeah. So as Mark said, we're aware Mark is one of LionHeart's counsellors. LionHeart counselling is available to any RICS professional, past or present. Their partner or spouse. And there's actually also now an opportunity for counselling for children as well, or those over the age of 12 through a partnership that we've now developed. So there are lots of opportunities for people to access counselling as an RICS professional. And we do, and we can and do we have put it into place where we have, literally supported an entire family, with children and with the adults as well. So yeah, it is definitely something that we can do. Great service to have available for people.
Absolutely.
So as we're coming to our close now, I think there's one other thing I'd like to point out to anyone that's listening or make people aware of that are listening. We've talked about LionHeart counselling. There's also our support services team. We have a recorded webinar as well on understanding bereavement in the workplace, which might be suitable for anybody who's got a colleague or an employee that has recently been through a bereavement and is perhaps not sure on the best way to support that person. So I'd really recommend that you check out that in our webinar library. And yeah, I'd like to say thank you, Mark, for joining me today.
Thank you, Jo.
I hope those of you that have listened into this podcast have found it really useful. It's given you an opportunity to recognise that those feelings, emotions, the processes are different for everyone. So whether you're looking to support somebody or whether it's something that you're going through yourself, you'll now find yourself in a better place for dealing with that situation, progressing with that situation. So is there one final piece of advice that you'd like people to take away with them today, Mark?
I think two really. I think firstly, take care of yourselves, and then I think also, again, if you are impacted, affected, or struggling with anything that we've talked about today, please do reach out to us. That's what we're here for.
Thank you. So thank you for listening to LionHeart Talks podcast. If you've been affected by anything that we've talked about today, then please do take a look at the LionHeart website. As Mark mentioned, you can contact us via email, via phone, or a chat feature is also available on the website. I've been your host, Jo Grant, and today I've been joined by our fantastic guest, Mark Hodson. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Jo. Good to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us on LionHeart Talks, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform to hear from us again, and don't forget you can find out more about how we're helping surveyors and their families on our website, lionheart.org.uk.